Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search, marketing, and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is Pete Birsinger, once a solutions engineer, now turned serial entrepreneur, having founded Podscribe.ai, say that fast 5 times, the world's biggest podcast database, and Picasso. No, I'm not talking about the artist Picasso. I'm talking about AKA PicassoKnows.ai, a data-driven podcast marketing platform to help podcasters, that's me, learn where they should be advertising. So today, Pete and I discuss his journey from solutions engineering to bonafide entrepreneur. We also talk about why he chose to launch 2 brands using ccTLD domains. And last but not least, we discuss the pros and cons to branding using non.com domains. So with that, Pete, welcome and thank you for making time to join us today, man.
Thank you, Alvin. I'm excited to be here and chat about everything with you.
Totally. All right. So first off, you got to pronounce your name for everybody.
Well, yeah, like I was saying, I don't think anybody's ever gotten it right the first time, but Pete Birsinger. Yeah, no, it's kind of one of those names that's just tough to get right. But
yeah, because it looks like, I mean, when you look at it, it looks like Birsinger.
Exactly.
Yep. I mean, if you're sounding it phonetically. Interesting. Well, leave it to a good old Texas boy to chop your name up. Oh, man. Well, so to kick things off, Pete, hey, man, let's briefly share at a high level with our listeners a bit about yourself, who you are, your personal and professional background.
Yeah, sure. So it's a bit of a windy path, but I grew up in San Francisco, went to school in UC Berkeley, where I studied computer science there, actually. And then after I graduated in 2013, I moved to San Francisco, where I was a software engineer for about 2 years. And I kind of felt like I wanted a change of pace, wanted to see somewhere else other than the Bay Area. So then I ended up deciding to move to New York City. So I went there and I started working for TapAd, a company in the ad tech space. So I at first started there as a software engineer, but I felt that I wanted to do something a bit more client facing, or involving people a little bit more, where I wasn't just mashing on a keyboard all day, talking to the computer. So I transferred internally to become a sales engineer, which I actually or a solutions engineer, sort of the same thing, which I actually liked a lot better because I was still doing some technical things, doing some coding things, but also I was sort of like the technical right-hand man to the sales guys on the call. So we would, get on a call with a potential client, and then, I'd explain the technical details in a way that would ideally make them want to buy our solution. So I actually like that a lot.
Well, I was going to stop you and keep the sales guys in check from selling stuff that they ought not to be selling.
Yeah, that would happen probably more. Yeah, probably most of the time, because they'll just kind of say anything, and then it's kind of like, well, we can do this thing, which is close to that, but so there was sort of a lot of that. But it was it's an interesting job that I like because it was right at the intersection of sales and technology, which, it's sort of a unusual place to be, because not a lot of engineers, at least that I know, want to go into sales and be talking to people, and not a lot of sales guys want to learn the coding technical skills. So it was kind of a unique position, and because of that, it sort of had some advantages. Me and another guy on my team, that's where we actually started working on our first company, Potable, while we were still there. And we always kind of joked it was a great place to start another company, just because they knew we were working on it, but we were doing our jobs well, and we kind of kept everything out open with them. So we started working on it there for probably 7-8 months, it worked out well, because we were doing our regular jobs plus starting to build up this thing on the side. And then we ended up raising $50K while we were there. And then we were like, okay, we ought to do this full time. So then we eventually quit that and then started onto the entrepreneurial thing.
So then now when you say, hey, you raised 50K, I'm assuming was that through family, friends, or what type of round was it?
Yeah, so it was sort of an in-network angel investor. So we had started to reach out to a number of angel investors who were in our network or loosely affiliated. So we raised that and basically our pre-seed round in a safe note. So that's how we got started. And we started talking to a number of other investors and venture capitalists as well. And eventually for Potable, we ended up raising about 600,000 in our seed round. We wanted to raise more, but we had, sort of some difficulties. It's not, raising the money. So, so we mostly raised from angels and then a VC firm or two as well.
Now, taking a step back here now, so essentially you had what relative, I guess, before you started Potable, you had roughly what, about 3 years of professional experience, somewhere along those lines?
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, about 2 years of professional software engineering and about 1 year of sales engineering.
So then, most people are probably sitting there going, wait, 2 years experience doing software engineering, 1 year with solutions, and you're just going to burst into really a lane that I guess now had you had any experience, in regards to podcasting? Because for most
Yeah,
people, it seems like you would go into a lane that you know something about, not necessarily, something that's divergent or totally different.
yeah, totally. Well, yeah, for one thing to clarify is, I mean, I had been coding the entire time in college, so an additional 4 years where I was sort of doing that. So I was reasonably familiar with coding, but we're going into podcasting and sort of the startup thing. How it started was the guy on my sales engineering team. He was telling me how he was doing this data science boot camp where he was transcribing podcasts and analyzing the content in them to then provide personalized recommendations to listeners. And I was like, huh, that's pretty interesting. And he was sort of telling me how he was doing it. And I was saying, well, I could probably make this like a lot better because I actually know how to code, or at least like more than you, more than you. So, and then I said, okay, I'll help you out. And at the time, I honestly was kind of hesitant to go into a startup or do my own thing. I didn't really know what I wanted that well. I honestly was kind of, I don't know about dragged into it is the right word, but I kind of just ended up doing it. And yeah, and I was sort of a little hesitant, and I think it's grown on me a lot since, and I'm very happy I did. But it wasn't really necessarily my choice to say, hey, let's start a company. The opportunity was sort of just there, which I'm definitely very thankful for, and I think it's worked out well. And then regarding podcasts, I'd been listening to podcasts for years before that, and I really liked them, so I was especially interested, and I knew how hard it was to find good podcasts, like new ones that I liked. So I thought it was a pretty cool idea. So I was open to it, but yeah, I had never built an app or anything before, but I figured we could learn and see where it goes.
That's awesome. So then what's interesting to me about this is, if we take a step back and we just talk about just the landscape of podcasting, just in general, this day, 2020, September at the time of this recording. And it appears to me, I look around at a couple of different folks' blogs, but oh man, what is Seth? I can't think of the guy's name. It's Seth. Is it Seth Godin? Somewhere around there. But either way, like he wrote and basically said, "Hey, podcasting is the new blogging now." Meaning that more and more folks are starting to podcast, and then Google is actually upping the ante, if you will, in terms of they're investing so much into podcasting search. And so it's getting interesting in terms of that you started this some 3-4 years ago, and yet you're coming right into really, I guess you'd say, a hot streak, or what's becoming a hot streak in terms of podcasting. Podcasting is not new; it's been around, but I think it's finally grown legs to where there's technology that can obviously support it. We have smartphones now for the past 10 years. And so all of these different things. So like, did any of that stuff cross your mind as you entered into this? Or was it, hey, I just happened to run into a guy that I was working with. He was doing this project. And because it seems like you are a learner, it seems like you are a problem solver, someone who, if you place a good problem in front of them, they're probably going to tackle this thing to the 10th degree. So it's like, it was that more of your stance that you are a problem solver and you wanted to solve that, or you actually looked at the landscape and said, well, no, this is the next big thing?
Even when we started, it almost felt like it was already like too late. Even like 3-4 years ago, it felt like there was already a lot of attention on it. But we were always extremely confident that there was a ton of work left to do in podcasting, specifically the discoverability of new shows. I think it's still an issue. And what we really wanted to do, which still even hasn't really been solved today, is so we would build an app. The goal was, we did, several steps of this, build an app that provides personalized recommendations off of the transcripts to the listeners. But then the next step that we wanted to do was do dynamic ad insertion to, show the listener an ad that was related to the content that they were listening to, sort of like, on most other digital advertising, if you're looking at a blog about, SEO, then maybe boom, you're going to get hit with some ads about SEO products. So, I think everybody kind of in the advertising podcast space kind of sees that this is like where we need to go. But the issue is that there's a lot of obstacles with the infrastructure in podcasting, with Apple really being the giant in the room, the kind of the benevolent giant where they just don't care that much. But because the listenership is so fragmented across different apps, it's really hard to get this dynamic ad insertion in play. And I think Spotify is getting almost dangerously close to having all pieces of the puzzle combined, with the listenership, and then they've got the ad loop. So
Right.
they're pretty close to kind of combining it all. And I think people in the space are not thrilled with that, because with Spotify, it's sort of like a threat to the openness of podcasting, because, if you're put your podcasts on Spotify, you might not have an open RSS feed that any player can pull in. And then it's this, eventually, if, Spotify can kind of take over everything, then that sort of shuts out other people and shuts out competition. I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. I think, Amazon, you saw with Amazon Music, they're coming into the space too, and
Right.
Google, and who knows if Apple will ever do anything? Probably not. But I think, there's still a lot of problems, and we kind of saw them. I think they're honestly sort of still similar to where it was a couple of years ago. Things have just advanced incrementally, it seems like, but they're advancing, definitely.
Interesting. So then kind of walk us through. So how did you proof the concept of Podable initially?
This is where I think we could have done a better job. I think that was sort of the issue. We started out with the recommendation engine, and to this day, I honestly found it to be probably the best recommendation engine out there, where if we would have your show, and then we'd recommend 10 other shows that were similar based on the actual content in the show. And I routinely used it back then. I was super into crypto. Cost me a lot of money back then, but I was always finding new crypto shows every day with the algorithm. And I think it was good, but the issue that we faced was that I don't think we fully realized, is that our recommendation engine was good, but it wasn't quite enough of a 10x factor to really drive in hordes of listeners to our app. Because most podcast apps, while they're not easy to build, I can tell you firsthand, there's a lot of bells and whistles. They're more or less commodities these days. Like, pay a couple engineers and, you got a decent podcast app. And our recommendation engine was good, but not enough to drive in the zillions of users that we needed to sort of have the dynamic ad insertion working. And what we eventually realized was that for a podcast app to be successful, the only real differentiating factor, it seems like, is exclusive content, which is why you see Spotify snapping up Joe Rogan, 100 million, and Gimlet and The Ringer, and because and you see Luminary and these other giants out there just, buying all this exclusive content because that's basically what you need to differentiate yourself as an app. So I think that was honestly, it was sort of our first thing. And in hindsight, to be successful, we needed kind of a lot of miracles to happen. We needed to build a decent app, build a good recommendation engine, get a bunch of listeners, then build a dynamic ad insertion engine, then get a bunch of there was like way too many things where it could have gone wrong. So we kind of realized, oh shoot, we need exclusive content. So we actually started producing some shows on our own on our app, which a couple did pretty well. One of them, I don't know if you or your listeners have heard of it, but it was called the Caller Daddy Show, and they're up there in the ranks of Apple Podcasts. Usually they're often like top 10, but we started them, and then we kind of had a contract dispute. We didn't really know super well what we were doing, and then that broke off, and then they went to Barstool, and then kind of around that time we ran out of money, so we were up
Imagine
to
that.
Yeah, we were up to like 9-10 employees. So I think, well, like the premise of the problem, discoverability, and then kind of leveraging that to go into dynamic ad insertion to help to increase the monetization of podcasts, I think that kind of all made sense in theory, but we didn't really have a great path to get there, and at least not a short enough path to last us for the runway that we had.
Gotcha. So now, where did the name Potable come from? What was the thinking behind that, or did you have other names to choose from?
I don't know, honestly. I think it was the other guy. I don't know where he came up with it, but honestly, it was an all right name, but it was kind of unfortunate because half the time you tell it to somebody, they spell it wrong. Like I bet half your listeners would say it's spelled Podable or some other variation, but it's Podible, which that was one thing I learned is like a name that like can be misspelt is not ideal. So I mean, it was an all right name, but like I probably wouldn't pick it again.
Gotcha. So now because I know we in the intro I mentioned Podscribe.ai. So which came first? Was it Potable that came first and then Podscribe, or how?
Yeah, so
kind of what's the connection there?
It's super confusing. So Potable is the original company name, and it actually still is the company name. So after we ran out of money, I basically had to kind of restructure the company, transition. And so from Potable, it changed everything to be public facing, to be Podscribe, since we focus essentially on podcast transcriptions and everything sort of comes out of that. And I think about a year and a half ago, I had sort of considered building more of the advertiser business intelligence product. And I had named the product Picasso and put it on the Picasso Knows domain. But we're actually in the process now of getting rid of Picasso to have everything just be under Podscribe. Does everything be kind of centered around podcast transcripts and have the business intelligence product, kind of still be centered around Podscribe, but perhaps have a different name. But we're working to resolve all the confusing pieces there. So the only thing going forward will be Podscribe. Potable is the legal company name, no public usage. And Picasso was sort of an experiment on the advertiser front, but shifting that back to Podscribe is because I think Picasso's all right, but the issue is it's sort of impossible to know anything about what it is or what it does from the name. So that's why I've never been the most sort of creative person with names and whatnot. So I think this, at least with Podscribe, it's obviously about podcasting. It's probably about transcriptions. So at least you can sort of get the gist of it from a name, and it's sort of hard to misspell as well. So, and we just, we're on Podscribe.ai, but I did just recently get the .com to redirect to the AI just in case, because we had some people trying to go to .com. They're like, where are you? I'm like, it's .ai. But now we're forwarding to that.
Shoot. So hey, stop all that typing, everybody. I hear you, listeners. From soon as he said Potable to Podscribe, I know all the listeners that are domain investors literally went over to the keyboard and just started typing away, trying to see if indeed he owns the matching.com. So there you found it. He owns the matching.com for Podscribe. So hey, get readjusted, get settled in the seat. That's all right. Back away from the keyboard. Let's get back into the conversation. So
That's
now
right.
with Potable, did you own the .com?
No, and that
No.
was we were .co, and that was all right. I mean, it was okay, but we still. I think it honestly is ideal if you could have the .com as well. I think, maybe not, you can put your site on a different like .ai or something to kind of give off a certain perception. But
Mhm.
I think, if you can't get it, having the .com is useful because it's just the most common thing, and you're always going to have, it seems like, a fraction of people who just are going to assume you're on .com and then go there. So we didn't have the .com, but people would sometimes think we were .com. So, people would misspell Potable. They think we were potable.com, and it would be sort of so it'd always be like a challenge. It'd be a challenge with that. So we did own the .com. So also sort of confusing, but we were the .co, which was okay.
So then let me ask this. So you went with .co for Potable, but then Picasso Knows and Podscribe, you went with .ai. Why?
So .ai, I like .ai's as the kind of the front page for it, just because it seems to sort of signify, there's some advanced tech under here. They're using AI on some way or another. It sort of has a bit more of a futuristic, technologically up to par feeling. So that's sort of why I went with those. And yeah, I mean, for the .com, now I'm happy we have it for Podscribe, just in case people think for whatever reason, that we are a .com, but it'll just redirect to Podscribe. It should. Probably double check that, but
And so you have the matching.com. You're going on, you basically launched the brand on .ai. So in terms of like, even when you raised funds, now were part of those funds used to purchase the .com, or how did you eventually come about purchasing the .com for Podscribe?
yeah. So that was a recent thing. So I'd kind of been eyeing it, but it was like, it wasn't like for free. .coms, it was like a couple grand, and then we started making enough revenue where it was like, it's probably worth it, especially if we don't have to pay it all up front. We can just sort of do this payment plan.
Nice.
So I kind of, at that point, it was sort of a no-brainer. But at first, when we were just sort of tinkering around with different names, I probably wasn't about to shell out a couple grand or even more or whatever for a .com. I feel like the .com, maybe if you have a unique name, it's worth getting right away and locking it in. But I think if you're, I mean, it depends on your cash, but if you're experimenting with a name or a product and whatnot, you might want to try something else a little bit to keep the cost down, and then upgrade to the .com, or at least have it when you grow a little bit more.
Now, in terms of the whole company restructure, so you figured some things out, you get restructured. Now, at that point, you had been, I guess, a platform for suggesting new podcasts based on user preferences. Like, when did you actually make the shift, or what, when did you have the light bulb moment about, oh, well, actually, we should probably be transcribing podcasts?
Yeah, so there wasn't really a light bulb moment. It was sort of trying a series of different things that didn't work that well. So we were we were an app in the App Store, in the Apple App Store. You could go download it, listen to your favorite podcast, download them like usual. And after trying the whole producer on podcast thing and sort of running out of money and having to restructure, we like, had to figure out, okay, well, what are we going to do next? So we definitely tried a couple different things. So like, one thing that we were considering was basically just using our internal transcription engine to license out specifically to podcast hosting companies or other audio producing companies, and having them use it. And I think we actually could get there down the line, but it just wasn't, we were kind of smaller, and I don't know if they wanted to test us. I don't know if we had the relationships
Right.
at that point to make that happen. So we tried that with limited success. Then we started experimenting with something else where we were, I don't know if you've seen how sort of the latest in attribution tech in podcasts, but essentially you can kind of set up this thing called a redirect pixel. So if, your listeners are listening to the show, they're on their iPhone, they hit play, then a download typically will go to your hosting company. Who do you use?
Podbean.
Okay, so usually the download would go straight to Podbean. Podbean would serve the audio file to the listener's app on their iPhone. But if you use a redirect pixel, what essentially it is when the listener hits download, the request would go to, say, our servers. We log the IP address, then we send the request to Podbean to give them the audio file. And then what happens is if, in this show, we talk about Squarespace as an ad. If the person who listened to your show on that IP address, if they go to Squarespace's site later, we can link the IP address that downloaded the show to the IP address that goes to their site later. So it's kind of a workaround where you don't have to use promo codes, but it's sort of like this middle in between servers. So long story short, we experimented with that a little bit. We found it was sort of still in the ad tech space where we were from. I think the tech was there and there are other companies doing it, but it didn't work so well. So then what we tried next was actually, I thought like, well, we have like a lot of transcriptions. Maybe certain groups of people would pay a monthly fee to view them. And I thought, well, there's all these deaf people and like most popular podcasts don't really have transcripts. So
right,
maybe they'd be interested in that. So then we put the top like couple hundred podcast transcripts on our site. And I started, kind of trying to reach out to deaf groups, and they were sort of interested, but I think there was like a couple issues with that. Like one, that people were kind of interested, but they didn't really know which shows they wanted to listen to. And I think the transcripts also are typically, it depends. We're using a different engine then, but a lot of times it's not a great experience just to read a transcript with like out the audio, just like sometimes be typos and it'll be sort of hard to follow. So, and I think, that people weren't into podcasting enough to pay like $15-20 a month to access it. So scrap that. And then I sort of realized, well, like maybe the approach instead of going to the hosting companies or to the listeners, straight to the podcasters, going to them to, because they're probably the ones who are most interested in having their show transcribed, for SEO, to create notes for their show, to, do a whole bunch of things with. So they're probably the ones who would be most interested, and, we can reach out to them directly via email. So I kind of figured, let's give this a shot, because we also have, there's a bunch of other transcription companies out there, but we're sort of in a unique space where we're sort of the only ones that are focused on transcriptions for podcasters. So that sort of has allowed us to do some unique things, such as automatically detecting when new episodes come out in your RSS feed and transcribing them like immediately. So you never have to manually upload a file. We also will add to, how for some transcription insights, you can add specific words into the vocabulary to kind of like look out for. So we'll do that automatically with your show notes and title. So you don't even have to put those in. Our editor will learn from, your past edits. We can help with like automatic embedding on the site. And now we just released the all transcript search widget. So basically I kind of realized that, the podcasters, they probably have the most interest in transcribing their show, and that there's kind of a unique spot here where there are other transcription companies, but we can really just focus on the use case for podcasters specifically, and sort of not just transcribing the podcast, but helping to make it as easy as possible to unlock the value of the transcripts for podcasters.
I mean, it's spot on. When I think about, because you sent me an email, and so what's interesting is I have a bit of background in terms of just transcribing, and then just knowing, stenographers, so court reporters, in terms of what's going on there. So like, for instance, I know that there's a company that I actually consulted with for a while, and they would They basically transcribe like all of congressional meetings for a given state. They would do some special cases in terms of transcribing, and they were trying to turn the corner to get to being able to do stuff for video as well as audio transcription. And what's interesting is I've always wanted transcription for Kickstart Commerce podcast, and folks have asked for it, but it has been really, really expensive. And so, I think at one point it was something, I want to say it was either like 60 cents or maybe it may have been even $1 a minute per transcription. So you start looking at my shows, which are longer form shows that sometimes can bounce anywhere from about 55 minutes upwards to, an hour and 20 minutes. I mean, I have to start saying to myself, is it worth $120 to get this thing transcribed? And if I get it transcribed, is it even, what's the quality? What's the level of quality going to be like? And so it's as if through your pivots, you've now landed at the perfect tool, because I'm now, 43 minutes ago, now a paying customer, but having worked it out and seen it in living color, if you will, that it works and it works well. And so that being said, like, how did you kind of break the glass of just the assumption that transcription is expensive?
Yeah. So what you're saying is a problem that I think that all podcasters have. I think increasingly most podcasters are seeing the benefits of transcriptions. They're like, oh, it would be kind of nice to have the written text of my show. I could search through it, show it to the listeners, make it searchable, whatever. But then they have a choice of, okay, do I pay a human to do it for basically $1 a minute, $60 per hour? The quality will probably be, 98 to 100% pretty good. So, it's like the high end tier. Everybody obviously wants really accurate transcripts, but is it worth the money? So then the next choice is just no transcripts, screw it. I'm not going to pay all that money. And then, but really kind of the third choice where we fall into more is using AI to get not a perfect transcript, but a 90 to 95% accurate transcript where you can still go in and label speakers, fix the intro, fix any typos, add links, etc. Where it's like the goal is to have a transcript that accomplishes most of your goals. Obviously, it'd be nice if it was fully accurate, but what we find is for SEO purposes and for your listeners to search through it and, people to read it, a 90 to 95% accurate transcript can accomplish the goal there, just about as well as a perfect transcript. And it can be about, a tenth of the cost as well, which is nice. So it's kind of the marketing or kind of the battle that we have in like kind of talking to a lot of people is like, okay, well, we get, everybody wants perfect transcripts, but like in truth, do you actually will like a almost fully accurate transcript work just about as well for significantly less time and resources? And from what we've seen, it seems like the answer to that is yes. And that's sort of the situation or the place that we're falling into. So, I think it's like, it's a choice, but I think there's clearly a middle ground between the human transcripts and no transcripts. And that's sort of where we sit.
Right. And I mean, and not only sit, but you do it very well, very well. And I've had a number of tries up the hill, and, it's one of those things of, one, it's expensive to get. Two is the time that it would take, because sometimes people, they would do a rush charge. Okay, if you want it in 24 hours, you're going to pay something in addition, or it would be like, well, no rush charge. We'll get it back to you maybe 3 to 7 days.
Yeah, see you in a week.
And it's like, wait, but I really need this. It's like, yeah, well, you need it, but not unless you want to pay this rush charge. And so, you talk about now we're looking almost like $200 for a transcript. And if you're a podcaster and you've not garnered sponsorships or sponsor deals, that can be a hard pill to swallow, just in terms of, just trying to make sense to go, man, if I have to do this every episode, like I'm going to run out of money pretty quick at $200 a pop.
Exactly. I think for some of the, the top networks out there and the top shows, sure, it probably makes sense to have, a human go in and get it perfect. But for probably like 98% of shows, you're not making a ton of money from your show. It's not like the cost to get that extra 10% of accuracy isn't really justified. And yeah, one other advantage I think that I forgot to mention with our service is that with our interactive transcript player, essentially it links the text to the audio. So then you can go in and, instead of just posting, copy pasting a long block of text, the transcript on your post on your website, instead, you could use our player, SEO friendly, and then click on any word to immediately jump to that word. So it's kind of another step up, just because like, okay, you're reading the transcript, but then maybe you want to, hear that part exactly. Then you're going to try to scroll through the audio bar and try to jump to that spot. It's like not necessary. So I think that's a help as well for people who are sort of trying to jump around, or at least maybe English isn't their best language and they just want to see the words highlighted as they're being spoken in the text. So I think that's kind of another thing. And we're actually about to, I think later this month, release another update to the embeddable player that'll actually translate the transcript into other languages there to,
That'll be awesome.
yeah, obviously quality is like the biggest concern there that we're kind of testing to see how useful this will be. But I think it's kind of like another step, because say you start out with a podcast, just audio in English, but then by transcribing it, you open it up to everybody who just maybe just wants to read something or can't hear. So you open up to that audience there. But then what about, everybody who may not speak your native language?
Right.
So it's kind of all about, making your content as accessible to everyone as possible. It's like why, it's good to put your stuff on YouTube or like all the players out there. You might as well make it, not put any barriers up between your content. So, it's kind of like, that's kind of the way I see it, is like with the transcript, you're removing a barrier to your content in a way. So I think that's sort of how I look at it. And, you don't need to pay a human $60 an hour to remove that barrier. You can remove almost all of that barrier, get it mostly accurate for significantly cheaper. So
right. Now let's talk about the nuts and bolts of just Podscribe, just the service offering itself. So you're transcribing podcasts or shows or episodes. Then what other features? Because I think this is, it's a customizable player. You can have the player, or you can have the transcription, or you can have both. Kind of walk us through kind of what the breakout is.
First off, we're working on making the site a little bit more clear, get some videos up there and whatnot. But essentially, the gist of the service is you're a podcaster, you publish an episode like usual, and then our system will automatically detect the new episode, transcribe it, and then email you back the transcript about typically 10 minutes after you publish it for about an hour-long episode. So automatically, you get the transcript. Then once you get the transcript, you can go into our web editor if you want to label speakers, perhaps fix any typos, clean it up as much as you want. You can also add links into the transcript if you want those. And then once you're happy with the quality there, then we send you an embed code that you can get, and then you take the embed code and then you just copy paste it onto your website post where you have you're putting out for the new episode. Then boom, you just copy paste the embed code in there, and then our SEO friendly transcript player will appear there on your page. So you get the SEO boost there, plus your listeners can click on any word to play and search through it. So that's like the most common way to use the service. That's probably 80% of the use case. Slightly more advanced use cases would be if for whatever reason you need the transcript before you publish an episode, we have a manual upload feature you could use. So that's one other tweak on the service. We also, for some of the more tech savvy clients, you can actually automate the embedding of the transcript player on your posts. So it's a bit more complicated, but all you actually need to embed the transcript player on your post is the episode GUID, which is in your RSS feed. So if you have, a web guy, we've got a number of clients who do it. They set up a template on WordPress. So as soon as they publish the new episode, they don't have to do a thing. It'll automatically pull the episode transcript player in right there. So a bit more of an advanced use case. And then also because we have your RSS feed, it's a cinch just like that to transcribe your backlog if you want it. Those are a couple other items to note about the service. And then the last thing we just released this week, which I was mentioning, is the all episode search widget. So it's another widget essentially you can put on your site. This one's an iframe, the other one's not an iframe, but essentially you copy paste the embed code for your show onto your site, and then your listeners can go through and search through all of your past episode transcripts to see where you mentioned any word or phrase. So say if you want to search, your listeners wanted to search GoDaddy, then boom, all the clips in all of your past episodes where you mentioned GoDaddy would pull up and they could play it, any of those snippets. That's the service essentially. That's basically where we're at.
Now you mentioned something that I found interesting. So, and likely I find myself in the crosshairs of this. So having 70 some odd episodes up to now. So just signed up, like I said, roughly about 54 minutes ago. When I think about what needs to happen now, so essentially what you're telling me is, hey, you can go back and pretty much transcribe every episode up to today or up to the most recent one. But the one thing, while we can technically do that, let's talk about pricing. How does that, how does it actually work out? Because obviously we've said, hey, the experience is way light years ahead of where things were. And pricing wise, how does this play out? Is it less expensive, more expensive?
Sometimes what we have, and I'd be happy to extend it to any listeners on the show as well, but for anyone who signs up for a yearly subscription, we're happy to transcribe their entire backlog, at least within the past year if they have an insane amount, all that entirely free as a sign-on bonus, just to get them up to speed. So that's kind of a motivation for a yearly subscription. If they don't want a yearly subscription, for they want to test it out, we can do it. I believe it does depend a little bit on how many hours. If they have like 6 hours of backlog versus like 600, the price is a little different, but it usually is between like $2 to $3.50 per hour, depending on the volume. But usually
$250 or $2.50.
$2.50 of audio. So but usually, honestly, probably most people who want like their full backlog transcribed will just do it for free as a sign-on bonus with a yearly subscription. So happy to anyone interested, just to because if you're starting to transcribe your recent episodes, you probably also want to get caught up with all of your past episodes. So
right
happy to kind of get you onboarded with that.
Man, I need to change my subscription from monthly to yearly then.
Oh yeah, well, we can figure something out after, for sure.
No, well, that is incredible. So here it is. We've gone from something like $1 a minute to basically, what'd you say, $2.50, $3 per hour. That is like, how does that happen?
Yeah, you just computers you don't need to pay them as much money to do the work.
Man, but that is awesome.
We're working on making it cheaper too. Yeah, I think that as time goes on, the cost is going down, accuracy is going up. So we're looking to continuously improve both of those.
Right, and you got a player that you can actually customize and make it look very much like your brand or identical to your brand.
Yeah, exactly. So we provide options where you can change the background color, font color of the player. And we're adding more customization options as well. So, we wanted to, match your site, not to stick out like a sore thumb out there.
Right. Now, let me ask this. So in terms of, and I don't know that there's a finite answer, but in terms of SEO, so what do you think the impact is on a site that basically has a podcast no transcript versus a site that has a podcast, has a transcript? Like, is there a night and day difference in terms of ranking or not so much? Or like, how does that necessarily play into whether or not you get ranked or favorable
Yeah,
rankings versus non-favorable?
yeah, yeah. I think unfortunately there's not a super simple answer. We're working on some studies now with our own with some clients and to actually try and quantify the results. So I think usually I've talked to a bunch of clients and networks who swear by podcast transcripts for their site, for their SEO. And I've talked to other people who say, transcripts honestly don't do anything. People just randomly parrot the advice that transcripts help SEO. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think for the argument, I think it's somewhere in the middle and can really depend on a lot of things. So I think first off, just by putting the text on your page, you are giving Google more opportunities to index your content because, all of a sudden you're putting out all this content, this text on there that Google can now index. It's like kind of the difference between a blog post with, maybe just a title and a blog post with, a full body of text. So I think first off, for specific searches that match well to what is in your transcript, I think it can be effective. However, it does depend, on one, your content and what the search volumes really are for that. So, if you're talking about things that people are really looking for answers for, and all of a sudden you have the transcripts, so you have the content on your page that Google can match, I think that's helpful. However, I think why transcripts a lot of times may not be the most helpful is because in some shows, what they talk about is so random and unfocused and so many different things that Google has an issue, really figuring out what this page is all about. So I think if you just throw, an insane amount of stuff at the wall, like a 4-hour transcript, and, it's kind of all about all these random things, I think Google is a little smarter than thinking, okay, if, it's because he has a bunch of words doesn't mean he answers what our searchers are looking for. So what thing I think that can help is if people are able to use certain parts if people are able to help indicate to Google perhaps which parts of the transcript are key, and if they're maybe more focused on specific topics. But for instance, say if you're able to, put maybe headers in the transcript or kind of put them in like an H4 and H5 tag, and kind of emphasize them, I think you give hints to Google about specifically, which part of the content may be more relevant. So we're actually working on adding that into the player to say, add like maybe a mini subheader to this part of the transcript, or, maybe make this part more emphasized. So then it gives Google more hints as to saying like, this is like what this page is about. These are like the important things, since Google will give more weight to, like the header tags. So I think it's complicated. I don't think if you just throw the transcript out there, you're going to be, the biggest podcast ever the next day. I think overall, I think they're a good idea to have, just, for a lot of reasons, but I don't think it's like a magic bullet. But I think, they are a good move to have. So hopefully we're going to have some good blog posts and studies about, the effectiveness where we actually, show sites like our ranking and what we're indexing for, and like the situations where they can be helpful soon. And one tool I recommend anybody use who's kind of interested in actually monitoring this is Google has this search console tool that they actually put out where you can measure, you can see what you're ranking for, see how you're trending over time, measure clicks and everything. So I use that before. I kind of look at it fairly frequently, and we're using that to track the effects. So I think it's like, if you're serious about it, you also want to be measuring it carefully, not just anecdotally with, oh, did my listens shoot up for this episode? There's like, I would recommend like using a tool where you're actually tracking like who's coming where for what terms, as well, just so you can have a good idea, and it's less kind of like voodoo magic and more, it's
data driven.
Measure this carefully. Exactly.
Yeah, it's data driven. And that's the thing that, really took me by surprise in terms of what you were doing, especially once you sent the email, because I get emails all the time, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'll take a look at this email and let's just see what this tool's about. It's probably as expensive as all get out. And then like you sent me an actual transcription and I was blown away. I was like, okay, you got me with one of my most recent shows and the accuracy was there. I mean, there were a few words that were off, but for the most part, I was like, it was there. And then when when we set up the call, got on the call, and you kind of walked me through everything, and I was like, sold. So I finally found the solution that I've been looking for. And speaking of solutions, so let's talk about Picasso for a quick minute, because you said that Picasso is actually being combined or being divested into Podscribe. And so like what types of tools, I guess, are being moved into the Podscribe toolbox?
Yeah. So what the Picasso is all about is business intelligence for primarily actually ad agencies, but also podcasters can use it as well. And what we do is we analyze transcripts of the most popular shows to figure out where brands are spending. So you can go in and see who are all the past sponsors of Joe Rogan. You can see where are all the podcasts that the Cash App has advertised on. You can see what we estimate to be their spend. You can say, go into a brand category, like see all CBD advertisers, and you can see, like a list of like the top 30 ones in podcasting. So then if you're, a brand spending or an agency, you can see, okay, where are my competitors spending money now? So, I can sort of figure out my strategy. I can kind of figure out where everyone else is at. So, and then the other thing we do, which is actually totally unique on that side, is the top 2,000 or so shows, we actually analyze their listener demographics. So like age, income, gender, location. And the way we do that is we link their podcast to their social media profile if they have one for the show. So like for Joe Rogan, we'll analyze his Joe Rogan's Twitter and also his YouTube to then figure out who are the demographics of his followers there. So it's not an exact science, but we are able to get pretty good insights. Like, Joe Rogan's show, like 78% male, average income, like, 56K, like location, age. So we have that data as well, just so then brands looking to advertise can have a rough idea of what the show looks like, and they can sort of pick out which shows that might fit their criteria. And we also provide listener estimates for shows as well. Not exact, but it's more meant to be like, is this show like, how ballpark, kind of where is this show at in the listener range as well. So yeah, so it's a variety of business intelligence tools. Mostly, the biggest one is tracking where brands spend, and that still though is centered around podcasts. So we're putting that, transcription. So we're putting that into the Podscribe site as well. And for podcasters, it's usually more for larger networks, but how they could use it is essentially as a lead generation tool, because they could see who are the new advertisers in podcasting, essentially. So, and you're like, Audible just came into podcast advertising. Let's hit them up. So you can see that who's advertising on similar shows. So they can kind of use it as a tool like that. And yeah, and actually conversely, advertisers can look at shows and see for their sponsor history who's renewed and who hasn't renewed. So you can kind of get an idea like, if Audible only advertised for a month on Joe Rogan, maybe Joe Rogan wasn't selling Audible that well. So you can kind of vet shows as well. So it's we've got a couple agencies as clients now. We're looking to focus a lot more on that later this year and next year. So we're excited about that. And we're also looking at opportunities to link the podcasters we have as clients on the Podscribe side to the advertisers. We're trying to figure out like potentially good solutions to link both parties there on either side. So we have some ideas in store for that, but nothing out yet though. But I think there could be a lot of interesting things we could do with that.
Well, man, like you all are covering, quite a lot. If you set the transcription there as the center of the universe and everything in which you just spoke of podcasters being able to find advertisers and see demographics, as well as advertisers being able to, actually find podcasters. Like, you've just basically come the center of the universe in terms of the transcription platform of helping folks find one another, helping people find new shows. Like, it's so many different angles to this.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of angles to it. And we're also talking to a number of different players to license our podcast transcription database to actually power their search engine and to display our transcripts in their players as well. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to use sort of like the transcription base we have to power the ecosystem in a lot of ways.
That is awesome. And so now you kind of you've kind of blown my mind, because I was over here, waving the flag for transcriptions, and here it is. I can think of many different situations to where I'd want to know what brands are advertising where, as well as, just what are the shows that talk about domain names. I mean, I know them based upon just exposure to our industry, but I know that there are probably one-off shows that happen where people talk about either buying or selling a domain.
Yes. Yeah. Anybody can go to our site now and just search through all the transcripts we have. If you search domain, it'll pull up, every show. We have basically every show on Apple, and you can search through all like the show's metadata, plus all the transcripts we have, just to see what might be out there. So yeah, so that's available just for, any listeners that want to check it out. And any listener can actually go in and read through transcripts if they want. It's totally free.
That is awesome. So then, wrapping up, I mean, now what would your advice be to someone? Obviously, you've had the experience as an employee. You've gotten to somewhat moonlight your way into a full-time business. You've had success there. You've also had failures. You've had to pivot a couple of times. So based on your experience, and what would your advice be to someone starting their journey in tech or entrepreneurship? Like, where should they begin?
Yeah, I think one thing that I
He's
would
like,
probably
don't.
stay away. No, I think one thing that would probably help is this isn't anything that unique, but I didn't quite know of it. It's a lot of the principles in was it the Lean Startup, or this other book called like The Right It. But basically the idea is that most startups and business ventures don't fail because of poor execution. They fail because of the market not wanting what's being created. So
that's good.
So like before, when we started Podable, the first thing we did was, let's build this app. But that's actually almost the worst path, because then you waste, a year and a half building this thing that in the end nobody really wants. So, the better approach, and there's a lot of ways to do this, but the better approach is trying to test out what the market wants before you actually build it. So, for instance, like before say you were trying to build another Podscribe, instead of, going out and building all the tech right away, what you could do instead is actually, reach out to, a couple hundred authors and say, hey, we can, do this for your show, transcribe it, and maybe show like a quick like video clip. Would you be willing to, prepay or give us your email for more info, or, see if you could get them to put some form of skin in the game. Ideally, money is the best form of skin in the game to prove out your idea, but there's a lot of ways to test out your idea or venture that doesn't involve coding and building out something. So I think that can save people a lot of time if they're able to test out if the idea they have is really wanted by anyone, because it's like really hard to, everybody thinks they got the best ideas, but it's kind of hard to realize your idea may not be what people want, but it's better to find out sooner than later.
That is true.
That's for sure. And I think too, is what's also confusing about that is people can accept that, but then they'll still maybe not validate their ideas correctly. Like they'll use kind of like focus groups or ask like their friends, like, hey, what do you think of this? Do you like it? And everybody's gonna be like, yeah, it sounds like a pretty good idea. but like it's useless. Instead, you have to ask them like, okay, well, do you want to prepay? Do you want to, give me,
Man, no, I'm not giving you
and
my
like
money for
give me
that
your
mess.
time? Yeah, exactly. So then you really find out like, okay, well, it's interesting, but not worth their money. So,
Right.
okay, then.
Time to
So I
pivot.
think that's, yeah. So I think you can learn a lot and like cut through ideas and paths a lot quicker if you have more of that approach. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting because and as you were speaking, I was sitting there on the parallel and I was like, man, that is very much like domain investing. Like if we're looking in, let's say we're looking at something like geoservice domains. Well, instead of going out and purchasing the top, let's say we looked at the US cities by population, in descending order. In most cases, most people, the inexperienced person goes out, they look at this list. Let's say they look at the top, we'll just say 50 cities. And then they combine the 50 cities with something like health.com. So let's say they have
hmm.
austinhealth.com. Well, they go out. And so I look at that parallel and I say, well, the good thing to do would be to try it with one, and preferably one of the either top city, maybe like a top city from the list, the most top city there in the list, and then the most lower. So you only really purchase two domains. And then before you go to sell those domains, before you actually go to purchase additional domains, you actually need to sell those first two domains to test out the market. Is there a market for this type of domain? And so I think oftentimes domain investors, it's kind of like what you were saying in terms of before you go out and go all in with the tech, it's like, no, let's take a step back. Let's see if people are willing to put money in the game. And there are many domain investors that'll tell other domain investors, "Oh, yeah, that's nice." And then it's kind of like, "Hey, would you buy it?" Yeah, no. Well, okay. Well, now you're starting to get down to where the rubber meets the road, if you will. And so it's the same thing. Can you find customers for these two given domains? If you're able to flip them, okay. Well, based on how much you're able to flip them, then that kind of leads you down the path of, well, do I go out and buy all 48 or the rest of those that are available, or do I keep using the same approach, two by two by two by two, until I prove it out to a point that just basically says, like, no, like you actually need to hit full speed in this direction and start going into other industries. And so that was just something that came to mind as you begin to speak about where you would start. It's like I can see that same parallel here in terms of domain investing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, it's starting small and testing
Right.
as much as possible. Like, I think some people kind of like me, if they're engineers, are just like, oh, it's just build, build, build. But I mean, it's a good way that you potentially could end up wasting a lot of time.
Well, that's the same thing. It's like build,
or
build,
more
build.
money, or money.
Right. And domain investors are like, buy, buy, buy. And we're like, well, hold on. Like, you're going to end up with a portfolio of domains that you haven't sold while you really just experience the sheer joy and adrenaline rush of participating in auctions and just simply throwing down cash on hand registrations. It's like, well, no, let's stop buy, 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 and let's really focus on sell, sell, sell to really prove your concept or your hypothesis, prove it true or false, one way or the other. But
Yeah, exactly. And I think even for like a lot of the products on the agency side now that we're building out, we literally try to sell them before you even build them.
oh,
Like
totally.
yeah, I think that's a better approach, because then you just learn a lot more quickly what the customer wants and is willing to pay money for, and then you're just a lot more inclined to be building the right thing, not just what you think is cool. Or
Right,
yeah,
right. This is cool. Yeah, but you have nothing to eat and you kicked out of your place to
yeah.
stay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. Well, man, last but not least, I mean, I guess, is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners? How they can get in contact with you or any specials going on?
Yeah. So if anybody is interested at all, always happy to give a free sample for their show out if they check out Podscribe.ai. They can find out, where to the creator program is right there. They can click on the link to check out, more details. And then if they want, to email me about anything, they can even email me directly for the free sample. It's Pete@Podscribe.ai. So you can email me directly. And for any listeners of the show, if they just mention, hey, heard of you guys on Alvin's show, then happy to transcribe their entire backlog, at least within the past year, with any yearly subscription entirely free to get them started. So, reach out if you have any questions or interested. And on Twitter, we're working on growing our social media profile now. We just hired a new guy to get on it, so we're a bit small there. I think we're Podscribe.ai there, but we're still a bit small there. But we'll be out there soon enough there.
We be strong, we be mighty, we be fierce.
Yep, and had a great time on the show, so had a blast. Thank you for having me.
Certainly, man. Certainly. Thank you again, Pete, for sharing your entrepreneurial journey.
Ups and downs.
Oh man, tell me about it. Tell me about it. I know those ups and downs as well as the listeners know those ups and downs as well in terms of domain investing, domain development and brokering and the like. So, well, Pete, thank you. And listeners, thank you for tuning into Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks, and that's all for now.